This is a statement written by an evolutionist, exactly what you would expect from an atheistic person who doesn't believe in God. In the beginning was matter, which begot the amoeba, which begot the worm, which begot the fish, which begot the amphibian, which begot the reptile, which begot the lower mammal, which begot the lemur, which begot the monkey, which begot man, who imagined God. This is the genealogy of man. Now, like I said, that's exactly what you would expect from a person who does not believe in God, a person who does not believe in the creation account that you find in the book of Genesis, chapter 1. But it's not at all what you would expect from someone who claims to be a Christian or someone who claims to be teaching what the Bible says. I say that then to show you this chart. This chart was taken, the picture, from the wall of a science building of a university associated with the Lord's church. If you look at the picture, in the beginning was the amoeba, which begot the worm, which begot the fish, the amphibian, the lower mammal, the lemur, the monkey, the man. In picture form, this is the identical statement to what you just heard from Mr. Smith, who was an atheist, and yet this particular piece of information, this teaching tool, was found on the side of a wall in a science building of a school associated with the Lord's church. I say that to say, we've been talking about the existence of God, talking about dinosaurs and other ideas and how those fit into the Bible. But what happens often is that there is the cultural pressure to believe in evolution, even though there's no evidence for it. Even though the science, if you're to boil it down and take only what we know to be fact, does not teach us evolution, there's cultural pressure to accept it. Let me show you just how much cultural pressure. This is Lucy. That's what she, and I put she in quotations because she later turned out to be probably nothing more than a male chimpanzee, but she was hailed as one of our earliest ancestors some 3 million years ago. Supposedly, she was on the line to becoming human. That's exactly what you would expect from atheistic teaching. I put her up here as an example of, we have a colleague, Eric Lyons, who had a relative who was going to a different university associated with the Lord's church, and his niece there, who was attending one of the night classes, cultural anthropology, was told that Lucy was, in fact, a relative of humans. And that Adam wasn't the first man. No, instead, humans evolved from primate creatures very much like Lucy. Now, that's what you would expect from an atheistic teacher. It's not what you expect from someone who is supposedly teaching under the umbrella of a university that's associated with the Lord's church and supposedly teaching what the Bible says. Here is why I believe we see that type of incorrect teaching associated even with people in the Lord's church. Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist in the world at the present, says, it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that last one. Now that's a pretty arrogant statement, wouldn't you say? But this is coming from a man who is responsible for much of the teaching of evolution and atheism that goes on, and he says, look, if there's somebody who doesn't believe in evolution, then that person is, number one, is ignorant. Well, they just hadn't been taught. Now, if I were to ask you the simple question, who in here wants to be called ignorant? Well, nobody's going to raise their hand for that. Nobody wants to be looked at as ignorant. Nobody wants to seem like they don't know as much as another person. The next statement, ignorant means you just haven't been taught. You just need more information. Stupid means that you're not teachable. You don't teach very well, so if they have given you the information, it just didn't sink in. You're a blockhead. It's just too thick. Your mind just can't take it all in. Now, we don't even use that word in my house, really, but that's what he is using to say not teachable. So either number one, if you don't believe in evolution, you haven't been taught. But if you have been taught and you still don't believe in evolution, you're just too thick. You just can't get it. Or, he says, not too thick, you just don't connect things at all. You're insane. Things just don't add up upstairs. You're one brick shy of a load. You are missing something. You don't compute anything correctly. You're actually insane. Or he says, a person just chooses not to because they're wicked, but he says, I'd rather not consider that option. Now, suppose that you are a young person, you go to a university, and the smartest person that you've ever met stands before you 3 days a week and explains to you that evolution is true and that anybody who doesn't believe in evolution is stupid, insane, ignorant, or wicked. You want to sign up for any of those? You certainly don't, and so what happens often? Well, I'll tell you what happens often. Instead of accepting atheistic evolution where they say there's no God, and instead of accepting what the Bible says, a person will take the wrong evolutionary ideas and will take some of what the Bible says and will shove them together in something called theistic evolution. Theistic evolution is the idea, theistic, the word there coming from the Greek word theos. You get the same word there for theology, means God in Greek. So theistic evolution means evolution that has God somewhere in it. And they think that that's going to help them because they think, well, when we go to the university, we can say, oh yeah, we do believe in evolution. And then when we go to church, we can say, oh yeah, we believe in God. And they can fit in with both groups. The problem is, theistic evolution is not even a valid statement. There's no such thing as theistic evolution because when you look in the Bible, there's no possible way that the Bible has any room for evolution. And we looked at some of that last night. Let me explain just a few of those things. If you were to ask, according to the ideas of the Big Bang and things like that, when did the sun get here? Before the earth or after? Well, according to the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, a tiny singularity exploded, and then the sun came along, and then the earth coalesced out of space dust after the sun, millions or billions of years after the sun. Now, according to Genesis chapter 1, which came first, the earth or the sun? Day 1, God created the earth. What day did He create the sun? Day 4. So the sequence is all wrong. There's no way you can fit in the Big Bang idea with creation. Don't worry about the time. I mean, let's just throw time out for a minute. If you were just looking at the sequence, we looked at dinosaurs. According to evolution, when did dinosaurs come? Before birds or after birds? Well, according to evolution, dinosaurs evolved into birds. But when you look in Genesis chapter 1, on what day were birds created? 5. On what day were land-living dinosaurs created? 6. So, which was created first? Birds. So, dinosaurs could not have evolved into birds. And there are literally hundreds of things like that we could show you that the sequence is just all wrong. But there's, I don't know if you would say even bigger problem. That's a big enough problem. But there's an even bigger problem for the theistic evolutionist, and that is the idea that somehow you've got to come up with billions of years of time, and you've got to shove it in the Bible somewhere. Because everybody agrees, evolutionists and creationists, everybody agrees on something. And that is that if you don't have the time, you cannot get evolution. It's impossible. Now, since Charles Darwin put forth his theory in 1859, the time needed for evolution has been increasing dramatically. In fact, it doubles about every 40 years. I think he started out saying, well, there were probably 200 to 400 million years. Then a little later, somebody said, well, there might have been 800 million. Now it's up to 13.7 billion, and there's no telling how much more time they'll think they need to add in order to say that it was possible. But what I'm saying is everybody recognizes that you can't get evolution if you don't have the time. Now, honestly, the truth is, if you took a bunch of computer parts and started blowing them up and just kept doing that, how much time would you need to blow them up into a computer? Well, it doesn't matter how much time you give them. The time is not going to do it. But even they admit if you don't have the time, it can't get done. So you understand what I'm saying there? So you're going to have to find some way to put in billions of years. Only 3 places you could try to do that. You could try to put it before the creation, you could try to put it during the creation, or you could try to put it after the creation. Now I say there's only 3 places you could do that. What I mean by that is, if you're going to go to the Bible and you're going to read the Bible for what it says, you're going to have to try somehow to fit billions of years into the Bible. We're only going to look at these two first ideas, before and during, because nobody that I've ever read tries to put it after. Once you have Adam being created on day 6, nobody tries to put billions of years after Adam being created on day 6. So there are really only two places that anybody that I know ever tries to fit in billions of years. Number 1, before the creation in Genesis chapter 1, and number 2, during. Now let me show you the two ways that people try to do that. There's an idea called the gap theory. The gap theory says this, that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. God initially made everything that there was. But then, between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, there's a huge gap of billions of years, and Satan and Michael and the archangels get in a big fight. Satan gets thrown out of heaven down to earth. Satan is so angry that he starts smashing stuff up on the earth. That's where all the dinosaurs were, and that's where the pre-human hominoid-like primates were. And so Satan goes down there and just beats up the earth so bad that God has to remake it. And so in Genesis 1:2, you see God remaking what he made billions of years earlier. Now, just stop right there for 1 second and ask yourself this. Remember last night there at the end of the lesson, I said, if you didn't have the cultural input for something, that if you were just to read the Bible, would you ever come away with that idea? If you were reading Genesis chapter 1, would you ever come away with the idea that there's a huge gap of billions of years of time in between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, where Satan goes down to the earth and turns everything into a fossil? Would you ever get the idea of that from Genesis? No. Where are you having to get that idea? From somewhere outside the Bible and shove it into the Bible. And what I'm going to show you very briefly is that idea just simply does not fit. You cannot shove that idea into the Bible because, number 1, there's no reason to do it. Number 2, it doesn't fit. Let me show you what I mean by it doesn't fit. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, the Bible says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them." Now, if you're going to try to fit billions of years into Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, you're going to have to redefine one of two words. You're going to have to say that a day means something other than a 24-hour period. Or you're going to have to say that word made doesn't mean that he made it from scratch. It could mean that he just remodeled. I don't know if you ever watched I don't even know what channel it comes on, where they remodel those houses, and it could mean that God just remodeled stuff that was already made. That's the two things that you can do. And the gap theory is the idea that, okay, this word made right here, that doesn't mean to make from scratch. That means to remake something that's already there. Well, do you know when you go to the text, you just cannot come away with that idea. Because if you were to look there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, then God said, "Let us make." Okay, what's that word supposed to mean according to people in gap theory? Remake from something that's already there. And the word create is supposed to mean make from scratch. Well, but then when you get down to the end of this verse, so God created man. What does the word create? What's that supposed to mean according to the gap theory? That's supposed to mean made from scratch. So created man and made man, those are used interchangeably. The idea that made means to recreate out of something that's already there just does not fit. Because when you look in Genesis 1:21, so God created great sea creatures. Well, what's the word created supposed to mean? Made from scratch. But then when you look at Genesis 1:25, and God made the beast of the earth. Well, that's supposed to mean remade out of something that's already there. If you're believing in the gap theory, you see that the ideas of made and create, they just cannot hold the weight of a theory that's just put in there to try to get you millions of years. They just can't do it. Now, I say that to say most of you have not even probably thought about the gap theory. That is what is taught lots of times on university campuses if they're trying to fit the Bible and evolution together, but most of us never even see or hear about or maybe even meet somebody who believes in the gap theory. Here's what you do sometimes in your mind probably think. Well, those days could have been longer than 24 hours. I mean, the sun didn't even come around till day 4. So maybe those first 3 or 4 days were long extended periods of time. And maybe that's where you could fit some time if you wanted to try to fit millions of years. Now, I understand that thinking, and I can see exactly why a person would think that. Now, let me politely say, I think that is wrong, and I think you'll see exactly why it's wrong while we go through this information, but I completely understand it, and I know exactly why a person would do that. I mean, in fact, and we'll look at this, when you go over to 2 Peter, for with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. I mean, couldn't it be that these are long, extended periods of time? Now, before we go any further, let's stop right here and make this statement. God could have created the earth in any amount of time through any process that He wanted. If He wanted to use 13.7 billion years, He could have done that. If He wanted to use 6 billion years, could have done that. If He wanted to use 6,000 years, could have done that. 6 seconds, no problem for God, He's all-powerful. 6 nanoseconds, 6 picoseconds, whatever He wanted to do, that's what He could have done. The question is not, what could God have done? The question, now listen to it, is what does God say God did? See, now that's the question that we need to answer, because yes, God could have done it any way He wanted, but what does He say He did? Now that is what's going to be relevant to us. If God told us He made it in 6 seconds, then that's what we should believe. If He told us He made it in 6 days, that's what we should believe. If He told us it took Him 6 million years, then that's what we should believe. So, if you're going to try to get millions and millions of years, some people have said, well, let's just make these days long, extended periods of time. But do you understand that you don't need a few thousand years in each one of these days? I mean, if you said with the Lord a day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years a day, let's make all the days 1,000 years, so you got 6,000 years extra. That's not going to help you. You know, 6 million years is not going to help you. You need 13.7 billion. You know what a billion is? A billion is 999,999,999 plus 1. So you don't need 1 million, you don't need 10 million, you don't need 100 million, you need 1,000 millions to make a billion, and you need 13.7 of those to fit somewhere in the creation account to get the time that the evolutionists tell you we've got. Now that means you're going to have to what? Get almost 2 billion years per day. So if you're going to use the one day with the Lord as 1,000 years, you're going to be stretching that as 1,000 years out to is as 2 billion years. And we're going to see why you can't do that. But now, let's look at what I call just a very, you couldn't make your whole case on this, but I think it's something that needs to be mentioned. Whenever you read about God creating things in the beginning, you get the sense that He does it and it happens. Just like that. He says it and it happened. You see Psalm 33:6, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of His mouth. He spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. The sense there is not that He spoke and 6 billion years later something happened. He spoke and that's exactly what happened. He commanded and they were created. There's no textual reason ever from any verse in the Bible that would lead you to believe that when God created things, they waited millions or billions of years to come along after He made the statement. You see Him making a statement and boom, it happening. Now, if you were going to look at the word day in the Bible, you and I both know that the word day is used in various different tenses or meanings. It means it has different definitions. Just like this, if I were to use the word bear, what does the word bear mean? B-E-A-R. Well, you don't really know, do you, until I use it in a sentence or until I modify it in some way. If I say there was a big, hairy, brown grizzly bear that was chasing me. Now do you know what that word means? Sure. You know, now it's an animal, mammal chasing you. But if I said, oh, the emotional burden was just too much for her to bear. Same word, it's a homographic homophone, you spell it the same, sounds the exact same, but now it doesn't mean something totally different. Yes, now it means holding up under emotional pressure. If we talked about a load of bricks that was too heavy for the carpenter to bear, then that would be talking about carrying physical bricks. So you see that there's got to be something that modifies the word in order for you to understand the meaning of it in any shape, form, or fashion. The word day, if I were to say, what's it mean? Well, you couldn't just say, here's what it means, because it means all kinds of stuff. When Jesus said, I must work while it's day, the night's coming when no man can work. What did He mean? It meant the opposite of night. That's all He meant. The time when you can see and the sun is out compared to the time when it's dark and you can't see. I must work while it's day because night's coming when no man can work. When you look at the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. Well, what's the word day mean right there? The day of the Lord will come at the eve of night. Does that mean a 24-hour period? Not necessarily. The day of the Lord, just talking about a future period of time that is undefined. Doesn't give you a 24 hours, doesn't give you a 12-hour, opposite of night, just the day of the Lord, undefined period of time. Then you get the total days of creation. If you were to look in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, you would read that these are the times that the earth was created in the day that the Lord made them. Use the word day to talk about the entirety of the creation week. So right there, the word day means, 6 or 7 24-hour periods. And then the most common usage of the word day is a literal 24-hour period of time. So you can't really get mad at a person that says, well, hold on just a second. The word day is not always used as a 24-hour period of time. That's right. That is exactly right. It's not always used as a 24-hour period of time. Here's what we have to ask ourselves. Are there reasons in Genesis 1 to make it nailed down to a 24-hour period of time? What I mean by that is, if somebody's going to say the word bear means a lot of different stuff, you have to agree. If somebody's going to say a large brown grizzly bear was chasing me through the woods means that that's difficult for someone to hold up under emotional pressure, well then the context shows that that's not the meaning of that word there. And if they tried to use that as the meaning, it would just be wrong. Even though that's a meaning, it's the wrong meaning in that context. So all we got to do is find out if in Genesis chapter 1, the word day means a literal 24-hour period. And guess what? I'm going to tell you this before I go into the evidence, but here's what I want you to understand. From what I understand about the Hebrew language, there is nothing else under Moses' control that he could have done to make the word day mean more literally a 24-hour period than what he did. Now understand what I'm saying by that. He used everything in the Hebrew language to make us understand that these were literal 24-hour periods of time. And I'm going to show you that as a fact. The words evening and morning. Now you'll remember over in Genesis when you start reading about the creation, and God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God separated light from the day. The light He called the light from the darkness. The light He called day. The darkness He called night. And evening and a morning, day 1. And then He makes the firmament, and you read the exact same statement: evening and morning, day 2. Then flowers, grass, and trees on day 3. Evening and morning, day 3. Do you know that the term evening and morning are used together in Hebrew numerous times? And when you're in non-prophetical literature, now let's make this statement. What's prophetical literature? Isaiah, Jeremiah, those are prophetical writings. Does anyone in the whole discussion think that Genesis 1 or Exodus is a prophetical writing? No. It's recognized by everyone as historic narrative. This is telling you something that happened in the past. Nobody says it's prophetic whatsoever. Do you understand that anytime the words evening and morning are used to modify the word day in literature like Genesis, there's not a single example anywhere in any writing that it ever meant anything other than a 24-hour period? You hearing me? What that means is when you put the term evening and morning on it, you immediately say, okay, there might be a lot of things that you could say the word day means, but in this context, evening and morning means a literal 24-hour period. There's not an exception in any Hebrew literature anywhere to anybody's knowledge. So, if you were going to try to make these days mean long extended periods of millions of years, you would be coming up with something that no Hebrew writing has ever used. Now, as you look at some of the problems that you would have, if you were to say evening and morning, and you were to suggest that these were long extended periods of billions of years, when you look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 through 13, God creates all the flowering plants. If an evening is a long extended period of billions of years of darkness, and you've got a plant that needs, number 1, insects to pollinate it, or number 2, sunlight to get photosynthesis going so that it can live, and an evening is a long extended period of a billion years or more, what are you going to do with a plant that's created in the morning and then it's got an evening of darkness that lasts a billion years? What's going to happen to that plant? He's going to die. There's no possible way that those plants are going to make it through 1 billion years of darkness. And yet that's what you're going to have to be working with when you have God making the grass and trees there on day 3. And then when you go to Genesis 1:14, you read, "Then God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, for days and years." If a day is a long extended period of billions of years, then what, pray tell, is a year in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14? Well, you wouldn't have any concept of that. Wouldn't even be able to begin to say what a year would be. And let's look at this. Some people have said, you know what, Kyle, there's no possible way you can say these days were literal 24-hour periods because the sun didn't even come along until day 4, so how would you even mark a time? Now let's think just for a second. How is a day marked? What physical phenomena is it that gives you a day? Lots of times we associate it with the sun, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with the sun. A day is when our globe rotates one complete time on its axis. Could our earth rotate without the sun being there? Absolutely, positively. You don't need the sun for the earth to rotate. God could have put the earth there and it have started rotating on day 1. Listen to this statement and understand it well, and I think you'll appreciate it. The sun and the moon and the heavenly bodies were placed there to mark the days, not make the days. Now, do you know you can go up to Alaska at some periods of the year and you can have a day in Alaska, a period of light that lasts 20 hours, and a period of darkness that only lasts 4 hours. Now, what does that do to the rotation of the earth on its axis? Nothing whatsoever. So is Alaska having a different day than we're having just because it has a longer extended period of sunlight? No, not at all, because the sun doesn't make the days. The sun marks the days, but it doesn't make the days. What makes a day? The rotation of the earth on its axis. So this idea that we didn't have the sun around until day 4 and we certainly couldn't have had a 24-hour period of time, wrong. It's just not right. When God created the globe, He set it rotating on its axis, and an evening and a morning were a literal 24-hour period of time. Now, when you look at 2 Peter 3, verse 8, the person that contends that this verse says that you can get millions of years here will say, yeah, but hold on just a second, look at this. With the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as one day. How do you deal with that, preacher? What are you going to do with that? Because that means that God's not bound by time, and that means that a day can be as long as God wants it to be. A couple things that I think are very interesting about this particular passage. Number one, it's not talking about the beginning of God's creative activity. In fact, it's talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And what Peter is saying to his readers is, yes, Jesus promised to come, and He will come, but Jesus' promises aren't affected by the passing of time. And if He made that promise yesterday, it's just as good as if He made it 1,000 years ago. The passing of time doesn't matter to God because He's not bound by that kind of time. It's not like He's going to forget in 1,000 years that He promised to send Jesus again. Now, a human, if you make a promise 20 years ago, you might forget it over the course of time, and that might affect whether you fulfill it. But what Peter is saying is, God is not affected by forgetting His promises over a period of time. But here's what I think is very interesting also about this passage. In this passage, it shows you that God knows how to communicate the difference between two periods of time. In this passage, what does the word day, what's it supposed to stand for or mean? A literal 24-hour period of time. What's the word 1,000 years supposed to mean? 1,000 years of 365 and a fourth days. So this verse shows you, and it's ironic to me that people go to this verse to try to get millions of years in Genesis, because this verse shows you that God knows exactly how to communicate the difference between a day and 1,000 years. And if He wants to do that, He can. And in Genesis chapter 1, you don't read a thing about any kind of thousands of years. You're just looking at that word day, and it's modified by the terms evening and morning, and God wanted you to understand it to be a 24-hour period of time. Can God communicate to you a 24-hour period of time if He wants to? Yes. Has He? Well, I'm going to show you, I think, even more forcefully that yes, absolutely, positively he has, when you look at the word modified by a number. The Hebrew word is yom. We would spell it Y-O-M if we were to try to get a concept of it. We have failed to find a single example of the use of the word day in the entire Scripture where it means other than a period of 24 hours when modified by the use of an adjective. Now, like I said, Moses used everything he had available in the Hebrew language to show you that this means a literal 24-hour day. When God separated light from dark, the first day he called day, and right after that you see day one. God makes the firmament an evening and a morning, day two. Flowers, grass, and trees, evening and a morning, day three. Sun, moon, and stars, evening and a morning, day four. A numeric adjective in every single instance of creation. And then even on day 7, you see the numeric adjective of the 7th day. Now, do you understand that this man is saying, number one, we've never seen the words evening and morning used to modify the word day when it's not a literal 24-hour period. Number two, we've never ever seen a numeric adjective used to modify the word day when it means anything other than a literal 24-hour day. You see what Moses is doing? When I use the word bear and I modify it with a big, brown, grizzly, there's no other meaning you can put on that. What Moses is saying here is day, evening, and a morning modified by a numeric adjective. And then, as if that weren't enough, you go to the plural of the term day. Now listen to this. The word day appears in its plural form over 700 times. It always means a literal 24-hour period when it is found in non-prophetic literature like Genesis. They say, okay, we've got this word, it's used 700 times. Every time it's ever used in anything like Genesis, historic narrative, it always means a literal 24 hours. Exodus, historic narrative, always means a literal 24 hours. Now watch this. Exodus 20, verse 11. For in 6 days, what is that? The plural of the word day, yamim. In 6 days, the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. You've got evening and morning. Right here it's modified by numeric adjectives, and then you've got it in its plural form. Now, let's ask ourselves this question. We're here in the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Now, lots of times I stop right here in the 10 Commandments and get totally off the subject. Now, you're going to have to bear with me here. This is where I leave the highway and I take a dirt road over here, but I think it's one that we need to take. In our society, it has become very popular to use the Lord's name in vain. One of the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament was, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, our young people are constantly bombarded on television, on text messages, and any number of things with the Lord's name in vain in the form of, oh my God. And you will see people that will say, oh my God, and they won't think one thing about God. They won't think one thing about how important and glorious God is. They'll just be throwing out his name in vain, totally in vain. I was watching a G-rated movie, and G is supposed to be for general audience. It was called The Rookie, and I think it was about 5 years ago. And this is supposed to be that any person in the country can watch it, from the littlest kid on up. And in the previews, the guy who's pitching, he's like 45 years old, and he pitches a fastball that's about 90 miles an hour. And one of his baseball kids that he's coaching says, oh my God, and takes the Lord's name in vain. And that is something that never should be done. It's something that we understand from the Old Testament. Even when you go to the New Testament, Matthew chapter 12, you see that for every idle word a man speaks, he will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. The Lord's name in vain is something that should not be done. Now, here's what I also see, ironically. Everyone recognizes that to say, oh my God, is something that's wrong and that's sinful. But the generation before this, and in fact, even a little bit older generation, has no problem saying, good Lord, or Lordy, Lordy, or Lord, I would never have done that. Now, it's interesting to me that in Exodus, it says, you shall not take the name of who? The Lord your God in vain. So even though the older generation would look at people who say, oh my God, and say, no, that's wrong, you should never do that. Lots of the people in the older generation will say, good Lord, I never thought about that. and will use that term in the equivalent of the exact same way that the younger generation uses the term, oh my God. So I think across the board, it's something that we need to consider, and we need to be very careful about how we use the term Lord and the term God, and we need to reserve those terms for reverence and honor when we're talking about or thinking about our Creator. Now, that's the side street. Let me get back to the main street here, and the main street here is, this context is telling you, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. Now we're trying to ask ourselves the question, what does that mean, 6 days? What we have determined is a day, when it's in plural, always means a literal 24-hour period. Now, why do you have a 7-day week? You ever thought about that? Now there's a really good reason why you have a 24-hour day. Why do you have a 24-hour day just now, today? Why do we mark a day by 24 hours? Because that's the exact time that it takes for our earth to make a complete rotation on its axis. Why do you have a year 365 and a fourth days? Well, because that's the exact amount of time that it takes our earth to go all the way around the sun in its elliptical orbit. Why do you have a 7-day week? What natural phenomena gives you a 7-day week? There's not a natural phenomena other than, like Brother John just said, creation. There's no spinning of the earth. There's no moon cycle that would lead you to have a 7-day week. There's no earth cycle. There's no sun cycle. But since the very beginning of human history, every single culture has had a 7-day week. Now, why is that? There's one simple reason. When God created everything, He set up the first week. And that first week was 6 literal 24 hours of creation, and the 7th literal 24-hour period of time of rest, and that was the very beginning of the week. Now, if you look at Moses' instructions to the Israelites, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and on the 7th day He rested, and what was the conclusion that Moses was coming to based on this statement? Therefore, in 6 days you should work, and on the 7th day you should rest. How long did the Israelites think that they should work during a week? 6 of the days. How long did they think they should rest? 1 day. Did the Israelites ever think that they should work for 6 long periods of millions and millions of years and rest for 1 period of millions of years? Doesn't make any sense whatsoever, does it? Well, why in the world did God use 6 days for creation? I told you He could have used any time that He wanted. You know that. Could He use billions of years? Could He use 6 seconds? Why 6 days? Very, very simple. That is what He wanted to be the period of a week. Now, I'm going to give you one more piece of information, and it looks like we'll just have time to get through this. The question is this: is man separated from the beginning of the universe by billions of years? Now, let me help you understand what I mean by this. According to the evolutionist idea of the billions of years, if you were to say that the Big Bang, or the beginning of everything, was over here on this finger, right here, the longest finger that I have over here on my right. If you were to say that the span of time from the beginning to now, the 13.7 billion years, is represented by my outstretched hands, then this is the beginning. You would not have humans arriving on the scene until the very tip of my fingernail on this side. So the time would start here, it would go all the way over, all the way to here, and right at the very tip of my fingernail here, you would have humans finally arrived on the scene. Now, is that the picture that you get from the Bible when we think about when humans appeared on the scene? Were they separated by 13.699 billions of years from the beginning? Or were humans there at the beginning of the creation week? They're the very first week. Well, when you go to statements by Jesus, you realize that Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, verse 6, from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. You see, if evolution were true, God didn't create Adam and Eve until 13.699 billion years after He started everything else. But if you take a straightforward reading of the Bible, you understand that God created humans on what day? Day 6. Of when? Of the very beginning of creation. So the question then is, can you insert the billions of years of time after? And you simply cannot. Nobody ever puts it there. Man was created from the very beginning, so we're going to have to ask simply, how old is the earth? The answer to that is very easily identified as 5 literal days older than humans. So how long have humans been here? If you can nail down how long humans have been here, then you add 5 days to that, and that's what you've got from the very beginning of creation. Now, it seems pretty simple, but I'm going to give you a very scientific biblical answer to this in about 1 minute. If you were to ask the question, how long was it from us to Jesus? Jesus was here when? We're here now in the year 2012. Jesus was here in about what? You're looking at 0 AD or so when he first arrived, maybe a little bit before that. So you've got about 2,000 years from us to Jesus. Does anybody dispute that? Evolutionists, anybody? Is that under discussion? Is that argued? No. I mean, that's everybody recognizes that. Okay, so then you go from Jesus to Abraham. When was Abraham alive? Well, almost everybody recognized that Abraham was alive about 2000 BC. So about 2,000 years before Jesus. So you've got from us to Jesus, 2,000 years. From Jesus to Abraham, about 2,000 years. So the only question that we have to answer now to get the extended time of the earth is, how long was it from Adam to Abraham? Do you know if we can get a number for how long it was from Adam to Abraham, then you've got the approximate age of the earth. Now, as you start looking in the genealogies, there in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 10 and 11, you can add up. Now, Adam was, 130 years old when he had his son, Seth, and Seth was 100 however years old when he had his son. And you can start adding up the ages of the father when they had the son. You've only got 20 generations, which is about half of the generations you had from Abraham to Jesus there. Do you know what this period of time turns out to be? This period of time turns out to be approximately 2,000 years. Now, a person will say, yeah, but aren't there gaps all in the genealogies? I mean, aren't there gaps where you could fit periods of time? What are you going to try to fit millions and billions of years in the alleged gaps in the genealogies? And Arthur Custance makes a very clear statement. He says this: what's never pointed out by those people who say that there's lots of gaps in the genealogies is that they only know about the gaps from places in the Bible that fill them in. So if there are gaps that are filled in other places, are they still gaps? No, they're not gaps at all. So if you were to say, you go to Jude 14, now Enoch was the 7th from Adam. The New Testament says Enoch was the 7th. You go to Genesis chapter 5, count down 7, who do you see? Oh, wipeout right there. I think he's all right. Who do you see in Genesis chapter 5 that's the 7th? Enoch. You can't get the millions or billions of years in these genealogies because they just don't fit. About how old is the earth? It's about 6,000 years. Everything that we know scientifically fits that perfectly. Everything that we know biblically fits that perfectly. Sure appreciate your kind time and attention this morning. Hope that you have benefited from our lesson. I have certainly benefited from your paying such good attention. Thank you.